Okay, Obi, we'll take over.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the Africa Soft Power sub-project. My name is Mba-Uzoukwu, and as we welcome you to the summit today, a virtual summit focused on how Africa can harness soft power effectively to transform its trajectory. We've been getting a lot of questions about what we mean by soft power, so I'll keep it short with the Oxford Dictionary definition, which defines it as a persuasive approach to international relations, typically involving the use of economic or cultural influence. The inaugural summit of the Africa Soft Power series, Creative Power, Content, Culture, and Platforms, focuses on how the continent must optimize the creative and knowledge industries to propel itself forward. We will be hearing from thought leaders passionate about Africa, about how the continent can harness its soft power effectively to advance strategic interests and shape global conversations. Considering our world today, we're situating the series on the creative people of Black and African people everywhere. I want to say thank you to all our strategic and media partners for supporting this project wholeheartedly. We're deeply grateful. Our second session is specifically about messaging, payments, platforms, and platforms beyond social media. And the moderator for the session is Stephany Zhu, Head of Marketing at AZA. She founded e-commerce site bunshop.com. She loves tech and the China Africa Tech Initiative. She also graduated from Princeton with a degree in economics and a minor in East Asian studies. And she just survived a long flight from Nairobi all the way back to the States. Stephany, welcome, and over to you. Have a great session.
Thank you so much, Obi, and thank you so much to our esteemed panelists and organizers of this Africa Soft Power online conference. I'm very honored to be the moderator for this session. We're really looking forward to even before our attendees joined, our panelists were already having a riveting conversation. And so we're hoping that will just continue online as well. Before I start in introducing our distinguished panelists, we're going to go through some housekeeping really quick. As you can tell, this is being recorded and is currently live on YouTube as well. If you want to participate, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom where you can just type in any and all questions. The panel is going to go on for about 1 hour, and then I will collate some of the questions from the different attendees for a Q&A session for specific panelists afterwards. So if your question is directed towards a specific panelist, please make sure that you identify that as well. You are all muted and your cameras will not be on throughout the session, but if you have any questions or any concerns, feel free to also use the chat box and you can send other written questions or concerns directly to through the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to go very quickly and introduce all of our esteemed panelists that are with us today. First, we have Wale Goodluck, who is the head of Africa for GSMA, and he's also a solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. He has an extremely illustrious career that spanned, investment banking, legal practice. In the last 15 years, he's been engaged in ICT and mobile communications, specifically for MTN. So I think it's very, very important. We're really looking forward to kind of the diverse background and all the different perspectives that Wale will be bringing in. Thank you for joining us, Wale. Next, we have Lucia. Sorry, is it Lucia or Lucia?
Lucia.
Lucia, okay, got it. Next, we have Lucia Brawley, who is the co-founder and chief creative officer of AMP Global Technologies. She's actually an executive producer of two-time Interactive Emmy finalists, Take Back the Mic, the World Cup of Hip Hop, the Mic Africa, and which is a project for Apple TV. She also has a very diverse background. She was a political organizer for the Obama presidential campaigns, and she's a graduate of Harvard with a master's in acting from the Yale School of Drama as well. Welcome, Lucia. Next, we have Chinenye. Perfect. Next, we have I'm gonna butcher this name. Chinenye. Do you want to correct me?
Doing great. You're doing great. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start with your last name.
You can stop with just stop with the first one.
Okay.
I'm the only male Chinenye in the universe, so you know it's okay.
Chinenye. Okay. He's the managing director, CEO of InfoGraphics Nigeria Limited, which is a technology integrator operating in Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. He his almost 30-year career spans enterprise solution architecture, design and software development, marketing communications, digital design strategy, and transformation in both public and private sectors. So basically everything that has to do with business, it sounds like you've done. And he sits on the board of several organizations, including Banyan Tree Capital Partners, which is a business procurement and outsourcing firm, as well as a number of Content and Compliance Monitoring Limited, which is one of the fastest growing media monitoring agencies, and then mobile health insurance pioneer and digital services aggregator, Salt and Einstein Limited, and then a communications and technology advisory, Open Media Limited, and a revolutionary peer-to-peer communication startup, Pluslight Limited. So Chinenye has a lot of experience with the different kinds of platforms that we're going to be talking about this panel as well. Okay, wonderful. And Eddie, I've seen you've joined. I like your hat. You're up. We can't hear you. Is your sound connected? Nope, can't hear you. Maybe your sound. Oh no. Okay, I'm going to introduce you as you reconnect your sound. So Eddie is a co-founder and CEO of Wapi, which is the first Africa Asian payments gateway, which supports trade and cross-border commerce. He's been a leader in transforming how financial services are delivered in Kenya, Africa over the last 15 years. He's been at Standard Chartered, KCB, and he's led several mobile money integrations, mobile banking deployments, online banking deployments, and digital projects, as well as launching the first tellerless branch and mobile virtual network fully dedicated to financial services. And I hope he can get his sound to work soon. Okay, here are the headphones. Let's see how it's going. We'll give it a quick sec, and then we'll jump into our panel.
Hey, how does that sound?
Much better. We can hear you now. Better? Yes. Welcome to the panel.
Hey, hi, guys.
Wonderful. Okay. So, so as we can tell there, everyone comes from very different backgrounds, geographically, professionally, and hopefully that's going to create a lot of interesting diversity and maybe some contention as well within our panel today. And so I'm going to kick off with a bit of a general question, but something that's going to be very influential within any technology that we create, right? And that question is, how has the concept of money evolved for Africans in the past decade, right? And I want to contextualize that a little bit, right? We think about kind of the first mobile money evolution on the continent with M-Pesa, which was started, in 2007, which is, more than a decade. Sorry, before I jump straight in, I got a little bit too excited. We're actually going to invite Wale to give us a quick keynote to set us off on the right foot, and then we get to jump into these fascinating questions. The floor is yours, Wale.
Thank you very much, Stephany. Well, I'm not sure if it's really a keynote. I just wanted to sort of set the tone and put out some facts out there to help contextualize the discussions this evening. Africa is great. It's a big opportunity. It's a big market. We talk about that all the time, but we need an enabled market. We need a market that is not just the consumer market. We need a market that is producing and is lifting people. The opportunity today in Africa, if you look at unique mobile subscribers, by the end of this year would be about 500 million people. That's 500 million people you can reach on one unique platform. Africa today has a mobile penetration rate of about 45, almost 46%. And that tells us that there is still a lot of room for growth. More importantly, when we look at the number of young people and the demographics in sub-Saharan Africa. So you find that loads and loads of people are still going to come online. Loads of people are still going to embrace technology. When you look at the building blocks for digital Africa, which if we must achieve, there are two things that we must do in parallel. We must make sure that one, our people are financially included. They're involved in the formal economy. We can identify them, we can address them, etc. And secondly, we need to bring our people online. It's not about the number of people who have a phone in their hands anymore. To sort of participate in the digital economy, you're going to need more than just having a phone in your hands. You're going to need to adopt the internet. You're going to need to grow, do things on the internet, benefit from the internet, and then we begin to see the sort of exponential growth that we've all been talking about. The fantastic thing about sub-Saharan Africa and Africa at large is that the building blocks are there. We've got the people, we've got young people, and more over the last 2 decades, we have started to build the infrastructure. So if you look at sub-Saharan Africa today, we have more people who are connected to mobile broadband. We have more people who are 3G, for instance, is now the prevalent standard in sub-Saharan Africa. 4G is still quite far, and 5G is inevitable, but it's not imminent. We find that when you look at all the other building blocks for us, the next generation, they're a mobile-only generation. A lot of them will have 99% of their interaction with the internet on a mobile device. Most will never use a PC. We have smartphones, coming in, prices are coming down, they're getting easier to use, and more people today in sub-Saharan Africa, we're about 50% smartphone penetration, and this continues to grow. The big issue for us in sub-Saharan Africa today, which we must address before we can then begin to talk about content, about messaging, and all the other things that we would like Africa to achieve, is what I like to call the usage gap. So today in sub-Saharan Africa, we have more people who are covered by a 3G or 4G network, but remain unconnected to the internet. So historically, coverage was the problem in sub-Saharan Africa. But today, coverage by and large has been addressed. What we now need to do is to make that coverage effective, is to make people who are covered by a 3G or 4G network to come online. The usage gap in sub-Saharan Africa today is about 46%. So it tells us that there's a lot of work to do. I like to say that we're headed in the right direction. Today, 3G permanent standard, we envisage that by 2023, 24, we will see 4G overtake 2G, and over time, we will begin to wind down the 2G networks. There is a school of thought that says that, well, perhaps what we can do really is to jump and begin to shut down the 3G networks for historical reasons. It's not the most efficient form of broadband, but those arguments are happening in different parts of the world, and we are going to need to have those arguments here. But the bottom line is that we need to bring people online. So when you look across Africa today, 62% of the over 800 million people that don't use the mobile internet are covered by a mobile broadband network. So the infrastructure is there. The old problems of coverage are by and large almost gone. Affordability still remains a key problem for us in sub-Saharan Africa. And when I mean affordability, for devices, perhaps less, but in terms of buying a data bundle, using it and keep buying and servicing a data bundle, that is a challenge. But I know for a fact that if we can use, for instance, the sort of value proposition that was used to sell voice in Africa 10, 12, 15 years ago, whereby people see immediate benefits from buying and using voice. If we can do the same for the internet, then Africa will blow, as we like to say, in sub-Saharan Africa. But we must create that compelling reason for Joe Blogs to come online. People must have a need to come online. It cannot be about entertainment alone. It cannot be about video streaming alone. That will come. Those will be nice to have. Those will be nice to add on. But the work that we need to do today in Africa is that we must find a way to bring Joe Blogs online. We must find a way that Joe Blogs can see that being online, adopting the internet is beneficial materially to him. He must see a value in coming online. He must understand that if I'm online, then I can participate in the digital economy. If I'm participating in the digital economy, I have payment systems to support my participation. If all these are happening, then this will lead to jobs, it would lead to innovation, creativity, and then this will translate into the GDP growth that everybody's talking about, that the digital economy is going to divide. So on that note, I'd just like to say that in conclusion, let us begin to think, how are we going to bring all these people in Africa online? And then we will then focus on our content, the relevance of our content, put the content in our languages, and then, we'll see how people grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wale. That was very insightful. I think a lot of the themes that I heard there really had to do with the importance of participation. I think a lot of people talk about inclusion, financial inclusion specifically from both a B2C and a B2B standpoint. But the other side of, we can include you, but you have to vote, vote, and you have to actually participate, and what the role and responsibility of service providers, of other players in the market to actually engage and get that participation, I think is a really important and often overlooked point. So thank you so much for—
Can I say something to that, Stephany?
Yeah, of course.
First of all, Wale, that was so profound what you just said, and you were singing an aria to my soul, because this is exactly what we are trying to do at AMP Global Technologies with our platform, which is basically big data for big media. So we reward fans for watching and sharing content. And we've created our own original content with this show we're bringing to the continent called the Mic Africa. And so that's the soft power piece of attracting youth with music, getting them on the platform, incentivizing and rewarding their engagement. And then our goal is to partner with telcos to reward fans with mobile data, so that instead of always paying as you go, and it's so expensive and so hard to get online, it's like we're giving them ad-supported videos that they can watch and enjoy and engage with. And the more they watch and enjoy and engage, the more they get rewarded with points, which translate into data packages. So we are very much in line with you in terms of what we are trying to achieve. And we see music as the soft way in, the universal fun way in. But once you get them online, as you say, you can have them start to engage online in a whole myriad of ways, including financial literacy, so they can compete with their peers in the global marketplace.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucia. I think it's those kinds of new models of engagement that really challenge, existing incumbents around how we can get that participation, and it also helps, it's a chicken or the egg problem, right? It helps the participants to also think about the nature of how they're engaging. Which brings me back to my first question, is thinking about how the concept of money and has evolved within the African continent in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, right? What I had mentioned previously was Safaricom was founded in 2000, not Safaricom, M-Pesa was founded in 2007, right? A bit over a decade ago. And the idea of mobile money is actually quite different from a psychological standpoint from physical cash money as well. And then when you start thinking about mobile data as a currency, when you start thinking about all of these access points as kinds of currencies. So I would love to hear from the panelists, how they've viewed or seen the changes in the evolution of money on the continent. The floor is open to whoever would like to start. Eddie, if you want to go ahead.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in there because I think this question could be more relevant to how Africans perceive money today. And I'm glad you added beyond 10 years, because when you really look at how Africans have perceived money, it was largely prestigious, inaccessible, and bank-led. And if you look between the mid-2000s into the late 2000s, as you've said, mobile money, M-Pesa was set up in 2007. You had new technology companies, and that's what I choose to call telcos, trying to figure out what utility do you give a mobile phone beyond communication. And I think banks struggled to do this over the years. And immediately after access to mobile technology, access to mobile phones increased, these companies started to figure out what other utility can we offer consumers in Africa. The real question here is, and I like Wale's introduction, how and Lucia's comment on how do we create new purposes for needing to access the internet. When you look at the reason of the perpetration of penetration in mobile phones was largely led by the need to access for money. And the need for access for money, even today, as we say mobile money is huge, is largely on basic and feature phones. It is not on the internet, because the way the technology was built by these technology companies was largely an offline model. Mobile money largely works for the mass market across Africa through an offline SMS messaging shortcode service. It is not online yet. So what we've seen in the last 10 years now is there's not been a significant utility beyond financial services to want an African to want to move to the internet. They wanted to get a basic, cheap feature phone even to be able to access the utility of financial services. And what is this utility? If you look at back in the late 2000s, like I said, money was prestigious, inaccessible, and bank-led. But the consumer behavior evolved into me not needing to just store money, but me needing to move money faster than ever before. And we've seen that utility create new platforms like e-commerce, micro-lending, whatever it is. And I think this is the conversation that needs to accelerate. But the question is, what is that utility that is going to exist beyond financial services that we can be able to deliver platforms that are beyond simple SMS shortcode messaging? And that's why I love the topic of this discussion, and I'm humbled to join such distinguished panelists to have this conversation, something I'm very passionate about and have been doing. And I'll use examples. One of the biggest challenges, myself moving out of banking and into the internet industry, when I was managing director of Oprah, is you have 100 million customers across 17 countries in Africa using a media platform as simple as a browser. How do you deliver a simple financial services to all these 100 million people? But the use case was not there. Does a Senegalese want to send money to a Ugandan? Is there a purpose for that? Secondly, the infrastructure is largely built on SMS, which is mobile money. And we've seen, banks have worked very hard and they've tried to adopt mobile technology to be able to deliver access, but they were largely technology driven. and had to build first principles and build new platforms to be able to deliver this access. And the question for me that's really fundamental to everyone is, what is this utility that will move? Because ideally, to move Africans beyond the basic mobile money, we've had the successes of mobile money, but what's next? What other utility can we create to move an African from a basic phone to a feature phone to a smartphone? And those utilities like accessing art, accessing music, cross-border commerce, commerce in itself between countries. But here's the fundamental challenge. We have over 50 countries, over 50 regulatory regimes, over 50 cultures. And all these cultures, how do we connect these cultures and introduce Africa to the world as one community? Because that's what digital platforms is. And one of our biggest challenges at Oprah was, you have all these cultures, how do you connect them? But are they connected yet? Can they send each other money? But we were led by financial services, yet it was simply as a mobile browser. But
so if I may, Eddie, just to kind of like jump in there, if you don't mind. I tend to look at, it's a great discussion. Mobile money is always a great discussion, except that it doesn't really speak to everyone and their basic needs. People have money for a purpose, like you said, a utility. So if the adoption is not happening, it has to be either because the utility of that service that you're providing is not meeting directly with their consumption requirements. So a lot of mobile money and the discussions around mobile money, up to me, seem to be about transactions. And it's reflected in the development of the startups. So everyone in the startup ecosystem, technology, fintech industry is driving towards payment systems. What people are paying for is what is critical. And it's not the infrastructure of payments itself. But we've got the whole of Africa and a lot of its best thinkers focused on creating increasingly better and better services that are going to a very narrow few. At the end of the day, when you go to the financial inclusion discussion that Wale had brought up, the question is, you're trading down from the top, you're heading towards the bottom of the pyramid, and what does the bottom of the pyramid really require? And if we cannot provide through these digital economy services what the bottom of the pyramid requires, you're not going to have that uplift from the bottom of the pyramid migrating, moving up. It's critical for the structure for us to keep in view the value chain. The fact of the matter is that the value chain for the digital economy as presently constituted is a net expropriation of value from Africa to other economies that have built those technologies. From the devices that we use to connect, to the networks and the submarine cables that we ride on, into the countries and the local networks, right down to the last mile. Almost every single component of that is not African. So the big question then becomes, what do we do? Can we move up the value chain and go to production of these things? If we can't, because the world has since moved on, then we need to focus at the end. And what I mean by focus here at the end is, what's the consumption? Because if I connect from Lagos, you connect from Nairobi, and we're going to the same set of services that are being consumed in a country in Europe, then essentially what we're doing is that there's a net transfer of resources from Africa outwards. So you asked the question, and it's the right question, how do we change that dynamic? And there are a number of things that I think come into play here. And I think it's absolutely important for us to kind of like focus. Africa itself, and the truth is that, comfortable truth is that we have a large number of people, and it's growing exponentially. And there is a huge component of that is young people. And they're all going to be digitally first, right? And mobile first, as Wale has said. But what are they actually going to consume? First of all, within that demographic, there's a huge number of people who are poor. So if you want to include them into the economy and bring them into the digital economy, you have to address the things that poor people need. And it isn't wire transfers. It's not necessarily transferring money as much as it is acquiring goods and services. And I can give you one example that we can look at. Last year, I think, 2019, Africa spent about $4 billion. $4 billion as a continent. We spent about $4 billion paying for expatriate labor. Human capital that we didn't have within Africa, that was brought in or was used externally, and we expropriated, we found $4 billion. Of that $4 billion, a large part of it must have come through aid. And that money is going out. Now think of it, a $4 billion injection to human capital that is African, living in Africa and operating in Africa, creates value, and that value can then demand services, and those services can then grow as it goes down the value chain. So until we get to the point where we can have large enough domestic markets that actually power the system, and the best example for me would be, and I think COVID-19 is forcing that issue, and here it is. Africa is under-educating its people. And one of the biggest challenges to education is infrastructure, and the fact that we're still running a 19th century education model, which is limited by infrastructure. And as a result of that infrastructure limitation, you cannot expand. A country like Nigeria, with 200 million people, the total tertiary enrollment is 1.7 million people. We can't even increase that because of the structure that we're running. And here comes a digital opportunity. So the digital opportunity that focuses on education as opposed to entertainment, or finds a middle ground between education and entertainment and becomes edutainment, immediately unlocks value. The poorest person at the bottom of that pyramid is going to find the money to go digital, would find a device to go digital, and would automatically create the kind of huge cloud economy that we really need to grow exponential. That's my fundamental. That in answering your question, yeah, we have to find a way of shifting our focus, because the danger of the elite is that we keep on making things for ourselves. We need to find a way to go down the ladder, down the bottom of the pyramid, and ask those guys, what do you need? And let's provide it. And it may come at a cost. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to chime in on something you've said, because you've mentioned a big word called fintech. And I know it's slowly being outdated and building platforms for the sake of platforms. But what that thing has done for the financial services industry is to start thinking about financial industries as platforms, just rightfully as the topic for this discussion, where it's the utility of delivering a financial service, where it's a platform. And the other significant thing you've said that's perfect, and you've given us an example where you compare labor being transferred. But here's the thing, there's another fundamental thing that is happening between Africa and the rest of the world, and that is trade. How do we, and that's why we set up Wapi Pay. If you look at remittances from US, Canada, and South America into Africa, it's just over $100 billion US. But if you look at the amount of trade happening between Africa and the East, it's literally 3 times that amount today. And it's because of our deficiencies in manufacturing, whatever you want to call it, but from India over into China and into Southeast Asia and down into Indonesia, the East deals very differently with the West. And this is where, how do we build digital platforms that have moved beyond banking to allow for new infrastructure, such as Wapi Pay, to allow that a merchant sitting in Africa can sell seeds or nuts into the billion markets sitting in Asia. And I think—
sorry, may I jump in there? I just want to bridge actually what you're both saying, because Chinenye, you mentioned education as a key piece in this. So one of the things that we're doing is, yes, we're doing our show, The Mic Africa, which uplifts the voices of artists from the different regions where the show is in the 6 countries around the continent. But once you have this youth audience in your platform, what are the other things you can do? So one thing we're doing is partnering with media companies to create in-app channels. And one of the things we want to do is create an education in-app channel, and maybe not just one, maybe a number of different education in-app channels, so that people can be learning on their phone, so that it isn't a 19th century model. You can be, and the amazing thing is that the amount of ingenuity on this continent is so impressive. This young population and people teaching themselves to make films or program computers or create robots just by watching a video. So if you help them get online and have engaging content that makes them want to stay, and then have rewards for engaging that also are database that enable them to keep engaging, now they can hook into these different channels and start learning. And so I think that that is a huge opportunity. And then the flip side of that is their engagement now generates analytics that allow us to understand these youth audiences and youth consumers and youth bankers, and then translate that understanding of the back end data to be pushing out things that are even more targeted to the audience and even more impactful.
That's great to hear. And sorry, Stephany, just to kind of like tie this piece together, like you said, you know, we look at something like, again, coming back to the education space. I mean, during the COVID-19, the schools were shut. I mean, billions of children across the world not going to school. What has been the response? We know that COVID is going to be with us for a while, unfortunately, and countries are having to figure out how do we move to online learning, virtual learning. What it has done is that it has spawned an entire ecosystem of developers, innovative ways of approaching teaching and learning without going into school. And that's created value. But most importantly, it's created value not at the top of the pyramid, but right at the bottom. So you've got people going to school now with WhatsApp, getting messages by WhatsApp, parents are engaging at homeschooling and stuff like that. I mean, hugely exciting stuff, but we haven't even got into the monetization component of that. We look at something like Ubisoft. This is a $5 billion company. We look at, and what do? Gaming. And it's basically animation, cartoons, and games combined into a single value that is generating some form of learning. You look at Pikachu, or you think about, you know, about Ben 10. Ben 10 is a $10 billion organization. I mean, literally, Africa has the capability, just like Eddie was saying, we can do the two things. I truly believe we can do both. We can provide real value domestically within Africa at the bottom of the pyramid and drive inclusion because we're providing utility, not from the financial point of view, but from the perspective of what is the consumption. Because we can't sit at the end of the value chain just consuming, and it's content that isn't ours. The next thing that happens is that the virtuous cycle is created, because now you've got a large domestic economy, but guess what? The creative industries is exportable. I mean, everything that comes from manga is an art form that came from Asia and it's taken over the world and is built massive industries across countries. What stops Africa from creating that type of content and making that content go global, even as we're trying to create a large local economy? And I think that's really where the dimension really is. I think that we must be clear that unless we educate our people, we will have a huge mass of people who would constantly be dependent on that few at the top, and it creates all kinds of social fractures. So the role for me, for technology, for the digital economy, has got to be to energize the base and get those people into the system, primarily through creating sustainable value around their capacity to take care of themselves by being properly educated. And then all the other stuff that happens around that ecosystem, beautiful and perfect, including trade and all the other stuff. Yeah, so that was a closing statement. I guess I'll talk again.
No, thank you so much. I think, you know, bringing this back to Wale's keynote as well, is this question of, we have a platform, we have an infrastructure that is internet as a general concept, and then it's about what kinds of value creation, right? We've talked about education, we've talked about financial services, we've talked about entertainment, and then obviously at all of these different industries, there's a lot of overlap as well, right? Edutainment, or, you know, education around financial services and financial literacy, and it just kind of grows and grows and grows. But I'm actually going to take this conversation back, just, you know, to discuss the actual infrastructure that we've been talking about as well, right? And my question there is, one of the main challenges when thinking about having having really popular local platforms that's scaled, is that there's so much fragmentation in the market, right? You know, Aza is an aggregator, and we have to plug into 5 different telcos per market, right? And then there's credit cards, debit cards, banking. Every country has their own domestic switch company or switch system. You know, there's all of these different issues around how fragmented the African continent at large is, not to mention all the different currencies and issues around that. So this question I'm actually going to ask if Wale can take it up first, and then maybe Eddie as well, is what are the barriers that need to be removed to increase interoperability so that these platforms can scale better across either countries or regions? Wale, can you start?
Yes, I'm happy to start. I think we like to, you know, we've got all the smart people in the continent. We all know what to do. Very often it's the political will to execute that is our problem. So you'll find today in Africa, everybody's really excited about the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. Oh, this is going to do a lot of stuff. We'll be able to do business between Nigeria and Rwanda, between Kenya and Ivory Coast, services, goods. You know, it sounds really, really nice. But today, in most countries in Africa, I can't even share data with another African country. They're it's so simple, the sort of cross-border problems that we have in sub-Saharan Africa. I spend a lot of my time in Nairobi. I spend a lot of my time traveling across sub-Saharan Africa. It is much, much easier for me to travel in Europe than it is for me to travel in sub-Saharan Africa. I've got visas to go into Tanzania. I've got visas to go into Zambia. If I'm in Nairobi, I cannot apply for the visa in Nairobi. If I have to, this is someone like me who is, I would say I'm a little educated, I'm a little bit more privileged than most, and it's still that difficult. So when we now come into our fragmented world, the work needs to start with our policymakers. Our policymakers need to understand and speak the speak. One thing that I'm seeing that is a positive trend across Africa today is that we're seeing more and more ICT ministers in a lot of countries also being saddled with responsibility for the digital economy. So the ICT minister is now becoming a more important portfolio in most governments. The last 15 years have sort of dematerialized the Ministry of ICT because the money, the resources have gone into private telcos and the regulator. So the ministry hasn't been particularly strong. But in the last 5 years, we're now seeing a trend across sub-Saharan Africa where the minister is also very often a technocrat, one, and also politically relevant. So they're beginning to have the right access. They're beginning to push the right policies. There are all sorts of clubs, for want of a better word, springing up in Africa. So you see like the Smart Africa platform at the Africa Union. We're having all the right conversations. But the problem is that we're having those conversations in Addis Ababa. Everybody says it makes sense, but it's not transiting into the different African nations. So we think that, so we're not seeing the progress, but we need policy change. We need a lot of regulatory review. We need to move our regulations and our policies in line with the way the world has moved. The way we do regulation in Africa is 15, 20 years old. We need to allow for competition. We should not be afraid of competition. We need to support private sector. Problem in sub-Saharan Africa also is that government is big and government is afraid of big business. So things have to change. And once we can get that sort of train moving, then we will begin to see the right policies coming in. Everybody is headed in the right direction. African countries can do business. Chinenye gave a really good example, for instance, in terms of, sometimes if I have to do something online, I first have to go to California to bring it here. There are costs to all that, but if we can keep some of our traffic in Africa local, do better caching in Africa, there are a lot of things that we can do.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Wale.
And,
do you want to, Eddie?
Yeah, and I think Wale has really summed up the real opportunity here for us to scale is regulation. If you look at how we're structured as Africans, and naturally because we're different countries, we have different cultures, has given example of having to communicate. That's how money moves. If I want to send Wale money from Kenya to whichever country is, say Nigeria, that money leaves Kenya, goes to New York, from New York and back to Nigeria. And those are the real challenges we're facing. That's the infrastructure we're using today. And the regulation does not allow for new infrastructure to exist, that we can create the movement of money within Africa freely, because COVID-19 has taught us. Movement of people is hard. It's going to be very hard. It's going to be difficult. And if movement of people is going to be difficult, what do you expect about money? Because the way we pay each other is I get on a plane and I carry dollars and I go pay whoever I'm going to pay. If I'm going to buy something in China, if I'm going to buy something in Vietnam, Philippines, or Indonesia, I get hard currency, get on a plane, fly, choose the product, pay. And so first we need to figure that out for Africa. How do we make, like we've done it with mobile money in our own individual countries, where money is moving faster and therefore new utilities can be created, such as movement of goods and services. Trust is democratized. I'm able to accept sending goods before I actually get the payment, because I got an SMS. And so I think one of the things is largely around how does new platforms that are trying to deliver financial services get regulated beyond the banking regulation, because that's the biggest challenge. So we need to create new policy, new regulation around how does money move in Africa for Africans, between Africa, so that it is faster than ever before. Because when money moves fast, guess what moves faster? Goods and services, commerce, services like education, healthcare. If I can access a doctor sitting in Nigeria while I'm here in Kenya, that's brilliant. How do we exchange those kind of services? And largely it's the infrastructure and the rails that you develop, and that's usually led by regulation and policy. However, we're not very popular in Africa in quickly developing these regulations and policies. So we need challengers who can come with brilliant ideas to be able to say, we do not want to exist in an existing framework. These are the areas of risk we've identified. These are the concerns you have addressed, and this is how we'll identify them. We don't have those provided for in the existing regulation. Give us a letter of understanding to operate and monitor us to get into this new world of having platforms operate services. And that's how M-Pesa was formed, for instance, in Kenya. And after 7 years, got into regulation. So I think it's for us leaders trying to create new ideas. Say, how do we structure a little working room area to be able to deliver these services without being forced into an existing regulation, which was not formed for what we're trying to achieve? And that's the reality, not just for financial services. I think it's for everything from trade, etc. It's challenging. Go ahead, Lucia.
Oh, sorry, Eddie, but what you're saying is so brilliant. And I think that what you guys are talking about is hard infrastructure, and it's vital. Without it, we can't evolve, right? But I think there needs to be almost like a PR campaign for this to smooth the way for the hard infrastructure to open up, right? So for example, our show, The Mike Africa, will introduce Africa to itself and Africans to each other. Right now, you can't travel, as everybody was saying, you can't travel easily between countries. But what if you can virtually travel through a show and you can see Mauritius, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, Rwanda, you know, from your house, and voyage there in your mind, and suddenly the boundaries, the geographical boundaries and mental boundaries and boundaries of currency and language start to evaporate, and you see yourself as part of a larger ecosystem. And that's the soft power piece that kind of smooths the way for for mutual understanding between cultures and currencies and geopolitical mindsets. And then furthermore, we can enhance this with a creative infrastructure. So people often think that you can't, that creativity isn't hard infrastructure. But if you create movie studios and media companies and TV channels, and you create content that makes the different countries look as enticing and fascinating and dynamic as they really are, now you're opening up economic opportunities for each of those countries and transnational collaboration and almost a call and response of culture and content. And that's what we're trying to do with our show, The Mic Africa, which I have to clarify is separate from our Apple show. The Mic Africa is our original show, and our platform, which enables fans to engage with the content in an interactive way.
Yeah, so Lucia, thank you very much for the comment. I mean, for what you're saying. Again, I kind of like, I want to suck it back into this space that is really killing me, because every day I kind of like cry at the level of what's happening, because it's kind of like easy for us. We do deference to everyone else, everyone who's here and people who are getting online. But then you think about what Wale pointed out, that we've got 62% coverage, but most of that coverage is not smartphones. It doesn't have the capacity. It's 2G and 3G. Doesn't have the capacity to deliver this type of stuff. But here's where it's at. You've got a continent that's currently 800 million people. Why can't I in Nigeria, why can't my child in Nigeria access the best mathematics professor in all of Africa who lives in Zambia and pay for that content? Why do I have to travel to Zambia to go to school in Zambia when I can access the entire human capital of a continent and bring it to bear? I think Nollywood tells an excellent story about not just soft power, but also about the economics of soft power itself, which is that it can work outside of government. And indeed, the more government has gotten involved in that industry, the worse it has become, because it grew on its own, right, as wild like a bushfire, and created this behemoth of an industry. And in the process, what did it do? Nollywood and its likes across Africa makes a 2-year-old an economic agent. The child acts in a movie and gets money. It takes an 82-year-old who's retired and is in the village and brings that person into a story and immediately commercializes and makes that person an effective part of an economy. And it's gone to every single, across borders. And the stories themselves and the format in which they've been told has spread across Africa like a wildfire, and it's been picked up. So there's a story for us there. There's a lesson, a huge lesson, that we would make a mistake if we take the digital frameworks and principles of the Western world and bring into Africa. We've got to understand that there's something that is happening. There is a technology, there is a digital economy that has evolved in the spaces where we don't expect it to. And the fact that we don't understand it doesn't mean that we should walk away from it. And here's yet another example. If I create a network, no internet whatsoever, within a school in my village, which has no connectivity anywhere, I can still drive digital. I can still teach digital. I can still hire digital, because with a camera and a laptop and a projector, I've created a digital world that brings the entire knowledge base of the world to one community. This is what is possible that doesn't necessarily ride on top of the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about. And it's not an either or, it's an and conversation. There's stuff that's got to happen in certain areas, but then where do we find the lift off? My argument continues to be the lowest barrier for us is going to be about anything that can go digital, not analog. It's got to be things that can go quickly digital and can translate across boundaries and borders without and even in spite of governments. And these are things like we've seen happen in the creative industries. We can translate that as well into the intellectual and the academia. And from there, we can go into other areas that barriers are relatively low, and we can build the kind of momentum and the size of the economy that makes sense. I want to be able to teach 1 million students not the 100 who can get into my classroom. And because I can teach 1 million students across Africa at the same time, my value as a lecturer is no longer worth what you're paying me for 1 month to teach 100 students. It's me versus 1 million people. And I will do so at a lower cost than paying the current tuition. I mean, in the US, the universities, Harvard says, is predicting that there will only be 50 or 60 universities left in the United States by the year 2030, because the digital transformation is obsoleting that model of education. Somebody asked a question on the chat group, and the question and the answer to your question is simple. We aren't building forward, we're building backwards. We're building schools that we came in the colonial era, and we're rebuilding them. And we keep creating legislation and regulation that's about building back and not building forward. If we want to go forward, the barriers are already broken. The internet was made for Africa. It's a place for community, it's a place for values, it's a place for sharing, and a place for collaboration. And we have to find a way to make that happen as fast as possible.
And I'd like to just chime in to that comment, if you allow me, Steph. And I'd love.
Sorry, Eddie, before you go, I'm just going to remind everyone really quick, we're actually going to open up to questions from the audience very soon. So if anyone has additional questions, either please type it into the chat or into the Q&A icon on the bottom of the Zoom screen. Eddie, you can make your point, and then Wale also had something he wanted to respond with.
Yeah, and thank you for that, and welcome those questions. The point Chinenye made, so he has a utility of offering education. I go back to the point of utility. How do you move an African from a 2G, from a basic phone, because that's what is, like Wale said earlier, I think it's Chinenye who said it, Africans are poor. You have to give them a utility to want to access a digital channel. And how do you move them from 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G? How do you move them from basic phone to feature phone to smartphone? And we've seen what financial services has done. It's actually shoved Africans to actually want to be in mobile technology because of the utility. And when Chinenye actually has 1 million, he's gonna have a big problem. You have about 50 currencies in the entire continent. And how do we translate all those currencies to be able for you to receive the entire payment in your currency? And how do we do the settlement for that? And how do we let those African countries allow your platform to receive that payment? These are the challenges. I think one of the things I go back to what Wale said, and regulation and policy and what the opportunity is. We have to build adjacent policy for these new models. It has to be adjacent. It doesn't have to go against it. It has to be adjacent. It has to be allowed to exist. And then we focus on utility. And that's my comment.
Oh, Wale?
I mean, very interesting perspective by everybody. I think we also, we need to really look critically at where we find ourselves in Africa today. Chinenye made a really good example of Nollywood. And another example that I'd like to give is in the early days, there was no mobile money in a lot of West African countries, but there was prepaid mobile phones. And very, very quickly, people caught on, and it blew, it grew like wildfire, that I could send money to my mother in the village on my phone by buying a voucher in Lagos, send it to her. She goes to some trader in the village who would discount it for her, often at a premium, but she would get the cash almost immediately. Then the telcos came and introduced what they call share and sell, which was, look, I can send airtime to anybody. I can buy bulk airtime and distribute to my children. But very quickly, people saw again the opportunity to use the share and sell platform just to do cash transfers. And then what did we see? We saw governments and regulators in Africa clamp down and, wanting to kill it. The same problems that we have today is that mobile money, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa is doing really well in a lot of countries. And if you look at countries like Kenya, Ghana, Ivory Coast, you will find that countries that have high mobile rate penetration tend to have high financial rates, ratios also. And countries with very poor mobile money penetration often struggle with financial inclusion. So if today in Africa, we need to begin to do things differently. Historically, we have a problem of always throwing the money at capex in Africa. So if we say there's a problem with the education system, somebody will say build schools. We don't really talk about putting teachers, enabling teachers, putting the infrastructure. If there's a health problem, oh, I'm going to build a hospital, but I don't have any doctors and I don't have the software and the infrastructure to run the hospital. Now I'm beginning to see a shift in a lot of countries in Africa. And this is the point I want to make. We're beginning to see people now begin to say, you know what? The supply side is not the problem really anymore. What we need to do now is to invest in the demand side. Let us invest in our people. Let us make them digitally literate. Let's have local content. Let's have content in African languages. All the content in Africa today, we tend to sort of confuse literacy and the ability to speak English or write in English or French. And they're two separate things. We have loads of people who are literate, can read and write in their native languages, but there's nothing for them online. There's no content in the languages they're used to online. So again, it's about local content, it's about relevant content. If you look at Africa today, if you open a 500-seater ICT center, free internet 24/7, 4G internet, 5G internet, but you block social media blogs, you block Google, email, you block pornography, you block religious channels, the place will be empty. You'll find 10 people there. That is our reality. So the work to be done is how do we establish that value proposition that will drive the people that you have provided free internet for to come in, use it to develop themselves, use it to make money, use it for education, use it to improve themselves. I think that once we can cross that, every other thing will fall on top of it. And once people are doing something, they will start to clamor for a payment system that works. When the clamor is loud enough, we will not have the impunity of the elite that we have today that deals with payment systems at a very, very peripheral level. We're putting money into payment systems that are internet-based, when majority of the people who need to be accommodated are offline. So it's like we're talking at opposites. So again, it's about let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's develop payment systems that address the needs of the people. We don't need to complicate things. You don't need to put 500 pages of regulation for a payment system that the maximum that you can probably transact in one pop is $25 or $50 or $100. You don't need to clog it up. You don't need to bring anti-money laundering regulations that you would use for the likes of Citibank, Chase Bank, and all the big financial institutions in the world and ask my mother in the village to comply. Thank you.
Yeah, I think to that last point, right? And I think somebody else also raised this earlier, that GDPR, is something that's implemented in Europe. However, it is, if you look at the similar policies in Nigeria and Kenya that have been recently implemented, it is almost a copy paste of GDPR, which is not really, valid or necessary for a lot of the specific circumstances that we are talking about within the continent. I'm actually going to open up the floor to more questions from our guests, but we'll start off with a question from Obi.
Hi, everybody. That's a great, great conversation. And I just want to jump in and ask the hard question. And I'm biased, obviously. I'm coming from the creative producers, the content producers, the storytellers, which might be seeming like it's an ephemeral and it's entertainment. But if you speak to it from the perspective of edutainment, as Chinenye said, what do you think is the key thing that needs to be done for our governments and our platforms to properly back the storytellers in Africa. Because until they are backed properly, all that's going to keep happening is people like Lucia, myself, and all sorts of other individuals are pushing individual micro projects. How do we get Africans to understand that the primary value is the African story? And once we own it and tell it, then we can monetize every other thing. Because even in the content we're talking about, I still believe it's the story, whether it's education, as the utilities are all about the story. How do we, from all of you, please, how can we make that happen?
I'll say quickly.
Lucia can start, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question, Obi. And our founder and CEO, Derek Ashong, is from Ghana. He is a native-born African, as are many of our team. I am a new and enthusiastic African, very grateful to be living on the continent now and grateful to be learning from all of you esteemed panelists about realities on the ground and to be your humble student in this conversation. But just the impetus that our founder and CEO has in coming here is to really take this moment where we finally have the talent and technology to allow Africans on the ground to speak for themselves and stop, Obi, you said before in our engaging pre-panel conversation, you were talking about all the animal documentaries about Africa, or growing up in the United States or living in Europe and you see, famine and war. But on the ground in Africa is so much vitality and dynamism and innovation and entrepreneurship and this young population with limitless potential. And almost you could start a business in Africa. It's going to be a high growth business because there's everywhere to go up, right? And so by harnessing the stories from the ground and sharing them between Africans and between Africa and the world, we can put Africa on the stage in the way it deserves to be, which is through the eyes of the people on the ground, so that they know that this is a place full of fascinating stories. Somebody in the audience, Christine Francis, was talking about, cycling through 55 countries and showing the world the countries the way they've never been seen. We have to do this, I believe, because Africans have an opportunity now to show the world who they are rather than being told from the outside.
I think that's fantastic. What you mentioned, Lucia, and just to focus on Obi's question. And in my understanding, if I understand Obi's question correctly, how do artists get Africans to access content?
Not quite, because I don't think the responsibility is on the artists. I'm asking, how do the big corporations, the big platforms, the governments back and create those platforms that artists can monetize on? Artists are creative.
Brilliant, and I'll give you two examples, really practical examples. I'm based out of here in Nairobi, Kenya, and where I live, they keep changing the security guard, and each time a security guard comes in, because he managed to afford himself a smartphone, because I believe when the content is delivered offline, it does not deliver the quality as it is online. The first thing they will ask you is, what's the Wi-Fi connection? And half the time that they're spending securing your property, they're watching Nollywood movies. And I'll give you another example. You walk into a store after fueling your car, you find the attendant on their phone using the shop's Wi-Fi internet to access African content. Now, this content is being delivered by aggregators, such as the previous ones I used to work for, and they've managed to build platforms that charge customers not just by the wallet that sits in the phone, but by their airtime. But they've managed to supersede that and use their employer's Wi-Fi to be able to access it. What's my point? My point is looking at what does it take for this consumer to access the content? They need access to the internet. They need access to the smartphone. So what do these corporations, as you've put them, need to do so that they're able to either aggregate the content or allow this content to be delivered to the consumer? So if you look at an example like in India, one of the largest telcos now, after 3 years, called Jio, I'm sure everyone has heard of Jio, sold or gave away smartphones for free across India for literally a year of free internet, absolutely free internet. And in 3 years, Jio is now the largest telco in the globe. And what are people accessing through these phones? Indian content. And I think that was interesting of Jio to do, because overnight, they moved from launching a telco to becoming the largest telco in the market. But at the end of the day, they can now see how to then commercialize this new customer base that they've developed, and then work with the artists to be able to see how do we then continue to deliver value for consumers.
So if I may come in there too, Obi, there are a number of questions that there are a number of things that come in, because you're talking about something that happens at some point in that value chain. I want to make the point that Africa's approach to this digital economy has to be African. It's got to take care of the realities of our situation. And I can tell you, unless we have, think about it. India has a massive industry called Bollywood. They are huge consumers of Indian content. Their education is largely in their local languages. They have 16 languages, and they have software that translates across all 6 languages. And you can go into school in India, in the rural areas I have, and you would see a soft keyboard that you can pick the language that you want to learn in as a child. And you type in that language, and you solve your problems in that language. That's how the content is built at that stage. When you're consuming content that is local and is relevant, you cannot run away from relevance. And Wale has already told us, take away the things that we are viewing, the worship, the pornography, and the music, and there is no content. The big question is, when we look at the data that is outside there, and we want to go down to the bottom of the pyramid, are they going to be consuming the same content that the elites are currently consuming? When we decompose the data, how much of that data is actually being driven by users who are in the upper segments of society, the middle to upper segments of society? Even amongst those, like you mentioned, Eddie mentioned his security guard. The guy wants to watch a movie. That's fantastic. But has anyone given him an option to go to school? Do we provide that type of, because for him to go to school online, we haven't even developed a value proposition that says you can go to school online. And you can go to school online, you can earn a degree that takes you out of this place where you're a guard, a security guard. Nobody wants to be a security guard forever. He's there, but doesn't see a pathway. Our job and our duty is to begin to architect how that happens. And coming back to the point about the aggregators and the big companies, we need to go to the big companies and tell a story that says, listen, we will deliver 10 million consumers to you, right? And those 10 million consumers will use 8 hours of internet every day. And they would also have an opportunity through those 8 hours to interact with your content, which is customized for that particular demographic. And where do I find these 10 million people? There are 21 million people in Lagos, right? 60% of that population is in the youth segments. And that 60% needs to go to school. And when I say school, I'm not talking about mathematics and things like that. I'm saying they need to be educated to make themselves productive. So that includes vocational learning, it includes technical education, it includes career skills, it includes basic competencies of reading, communicating and all that. Why do people stand as a security guard in front of a bank and all they do with their phones is browse music or that type of content? When he can spend that time going to school, improving himself and becoming and increasing the productivity of labor. We have to find a way to take our tech and make our tech super relevant. And I just really want to kind of like land on one point. There's so much I really just want to. I think we make a mistake if we ask government, until the guys on this panel, all you huge people become the ministers and the presidents of this African continent, we have to deal with what we have. And so what we have is just not right, and we know that. And this is why a country like Rwanda stands out. Because then you can see a minister for communications who's 30-something years old, And then you can see a cabinet that is gender, that respects gender and provides opportunity for gender. And then you can see consistency in policy in a country like Rwanda. And then they can say, as a Liberia once said, we want internet across the entirety of Liberia. Liberia is the size of Lagos. We need to understand that for us, the path to the digital economy for us in Africa is made up of two pieces. The first is we must build a broad, pervasive, and inclusive local cloud. We've got to find a way to allow people connect and start to consume digital services without going into the internet. That's the first step. Because once you give anyone, as we all know, if anybody you give a device today is going to look for an upgrade within a year. Anyone you give 1 gig of data is going to look for 5 gig of data within a week. If we want to bring the bottom of the pyramid into that space and expand the digital cloud, we've got to do basic things. And the first part is, let us build the local cloud. Let's make sure as many people as are possible can be continuously and pervasively connected to a local internet. From that local internet, they will go into the global internet. And it's going to be a seamless thing. As you're increasing your capacity, you're upgrading into that global internet, and we start to draw down. Until we fundamentally change this value chain by making local consumption what sits at the end of that connectivity, that digital economy, we're going to be stuck. And that's why, Obi, you can't make a proper economic argument to a large corporate, because you just can't deliver 10 million eyeballs. You can't deliver 10 million people for 8 hours in a day. Until you do that, you will not get the big guys to come behind you. That's my view. So, sorry.
We will do it together.
Your commitment to education is so inspiring, and I think you're exactly right about the different facets of education. And one facet of education is that technical and vocational learning. So Obi, back to your question about some of the things that can be done on the political, governmental, and banking level. If DFIs invest in building studios, a movie studio or a TV studio, this is an economy unto itself, where there are so many different levels of vocational training available and jobs available, from the not just on the creative side of things, but the technical side of things, lighting and sound, transportation. There are so many different jobs that go along with that. So an investment in creative infrastructure is an investment in the local economy, is an investment in education. And then the content that those studios produce is also like a tourism commercial for whatever country it's displaying. So it has many, many layers of ROI if people will be motivated to invest in these creative economies.
Another point maybe I could just make is I love also Chinenye's commitment to education. And one of the things we've seen in delivering education, especially to mass market, people who are less educated, vocal skills, etc., is where do they find a market to be able to earn money for that vocation? And one of the things we've seen with powering trade between East Africa and in Asia with Wapi is the first thing we did is demonstrate to a simple merchant that you can buy 20 chargers from a Chinese supplier and pay them through Wapi. It gets delivered within a week. You buy them for X and sell them for 5X, and you've made money. The reason why they would want an education, and you said this point earlier, Chinenye, is because majority of Africans are poor. The first thing in their minds is, how do I generate income? How do I generate value for my family? Because I need to feed them, I need to take care of their healthcare, I need to stop living off every day. And once what we were able to do with Wapi is demonstrate, hang on, there's this thing called trade, where you can buy something for X and sell it for 2, 3, 5X, and it's actually not even coming from Africa. And this is why, as Wapi, we said we need to get into this forum. How can those products come from other African countries? Right.
Wale, did you have something to say?
Yes, I think in summary, alluding to Obi's question, one, I keep saying that we need to remove the barriers. And to remove the barriers, you need a lot of work done at the policy and regulatory level. Across Africa, we tend to tax investment rather than tax profitability. So once an area begins to thrive, in most countries in Africa, you find that government quickly rushes there and puts in barriers. So I'll give an example. In several countries in sub-Saharan Africa, they're beginning to ban the use of motorcycles as local taxis. And so you've taken a large population of young men who have, this is the only thing they know. They've invested, bought a motorcycle, and they're riding them up and down. Rightfully, yes, this is not sustainable in a 21st century world. A lot of them then convert and become courier delivery services. And then governments begin to introduce a whole rush of regulations, taxes, levies, everything, driving them out of business. So the point I'm trying to make is that for those in the creative industry, the financial models have changed. We're not going to find people in scale in sub-Saharan Africa who are going to pay to watch something. But what we will find is that if the content is right, people will watch it. So I know that Obi is an expert in this field anyway, but once the content is right, it's available and people can get to the content and watch it, albeit in quotes for free. Then there'll be other models that will pay for people to watch. And because if the creators are encouraged, they see revenue, they see money, they will come out with a lot of content. Today in sub-Saharan Africa, we have people who have built significant businesses just writing and sharing on WhatsApp. You have comedians across in Uganda, in Kenya, in Nigeria. They've built an industry just sharing their videos on WhatsApp. And from WhatsApp, it has led to product endorsements. They're now on mainstream television. They're being invited to anchor events. And we've built an ecosystem around that. So what we need to do is let's remove the barriers, one, for creating the content. Secondly, let's remove the barriers for accessing the content. Let's make it easy, cheap, interesting, fun, and profitable. Once we put those things together, like Nollywood, it would fly on its own. You don't need government to really come in and hold hands, hold people. Once just government remove the barriers, remove the handcuffs, this will grow on its own.
Great, thank you so much. We're coming actually to the end of our wonderful hour and a half. Josephine has actually asked, speaking about the infrastructure for the internet already existing for connectivity and opt-in being the issue. And then we have also touched briefly on, the issues around 2G and 3G versus, 4G and then the future 5G. Is it necessary, and then Chinenye also talked about, local internet and creating networks within smaller, zones rather than just plugging into the existing internet. Is the necessary internet infrastructure already present in all the rural areas or just the urban areas? I'm gonna ask Wale that since he's the GSMA expert here.
Truth be told, and more with the recent consequences of the pandemic, there's a big clamor for universal connectivity. Now, universal connectivity is not going to happen overnight. But I think that on the back of as much connectivity as possible, we also need to have as much universal services as possible. Again, I come back to the question of not only having coverage, but having people adopt internet. The issues in the rural communities are issues of infrastructure economics. It costs a lot more to put connectivity in a rural village. There's very little or no effective demand, and very often the interventions by government have been, again, to throw money at the capex end, while the devil is in the opex. So again, it's important that we must realize that networks are built for people, not for geography. So when you go to countries in Africa, for instance, that population is really, really small. Addressable market is perhaps 1 million people. And the regulations in those countries say you must put in 2,000 base stations. Per capita, that is just economically impossible. Now, if you're talking a country like DRC, like Nigeria, where there are big populations, yes, you can put in 2,000 base stations and it wouldn't even make a dent. So the reality is that we are not going to have universal coverage overnight. There's nowhere in the world that there's universal coverage. What government again needs to do is to sit down and, I dare say that I have been involved with some of the recent broadband plans being developed by different African countries. And we're beginning to see them going in the right direction. It's not just about giving subsidies for someone to build a base station in a remote village that carries no traffic, that the operator abandons after 6 months because it's just too expensive to run. There's now a bit more thinking around it. A lot of the monies that are stuck in USF funds across sub-Saharan Africa, I think today we probably have in excess of $500 million stuck in USF funds, doing nothing. This is money that is supposed to facilitate universal access, universal services in underserved rural areas. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of removing the bureaucracy and bringing those investments, putting the necessary investments in those communities.
So before we only have 4 minutes left on the panel, and so I'm gonna actually, this has been the easiest panel I've ever moderated. I've had to say like 3 words throughout the whole thing. Everyone's just chiming in. But I'm just gonna ask us to close off with everybody. You get 1 minute to kind of summarize your points. Going back to this beyond the topic of beyond platforms, and any kind of last pieces of advice or insights that we want to share with our listeners. Chinenye, do you want to start with you?
You should have chosen me last because I will take up everybody else's oxygen. So, so let me just kind of try. Yeah. So let me just kind of wrap it up. And I think I want to land on what Wale has said. Again, I come back to this point. We have yet to develop Africa's model for the digital economy. And until we do and recognize that we have, for instance, to build local networks that will then offload onto the larger networks in the areas where infrastructure cannot go. For instance, we've invested in a startup that has built a mesh network that does everything that you would do on an internet in a local community, and is designed for IDP camps and places where the GSM and the other big companies can't get to. Now, that kind of thing develops at that base the kind of community that can consume content. Same thing with schools and so on and so forth. So that's the first leg. We have to go back to the bottom of the pyramid and build use cases around the bottom of the pyramid and allow the technology flower at that base and then start to propagate upwards. And a few things will happen as a consequence of that. I was in India when they launched Cash, which was their own version of the Apple iPad. And they set a goal for themselves. They said, listen, we can't allow 10 million people, which is 1% of our population, spend $400 buying iPads. So we will take that 10 million times the $400 each, and we will invest it in designing a system. And so they built an Cash, which is a tablet for students, and they gave it out to students at $40. Right? It's built in China, designed in India, built in China for $80, and it's given to students for $40. Government pays the balance as a discount, as a subsidy for the child. And instantly, 10 million Indian students were online and using a tablet and included a digital economy. We need to do radical things like that, that understand that we have to build our own version of a digital economy and not go by the rules of what has happened elsewhere. And at the heart of all that is content. It's got to be content. And if we don't build our content, we don't teach history, for instance. So how are our children going to want to consume African content? We don't teach, my children don't know the history of Zambia. We know kind of Kaunda, we know those kind of people, but nothing else, no culture, no nothing. Until we start to bring that history alive in our children and teach it, they will grow to 20, 30-year-old consumers who keep looking for content that's coming from Europe and from America, and increasingly even from Asia. Manga is huge in Nigeria, for instance, but all the cartoonists in our country, none of them is making any reasonable amount of money. So I'll just stop there so that I don't take up the rest of the
No worries. Yeah. Thank you so much. Wale, do you want to go next?
I think for me, what I'd like people to take away is that we've got all the building blocks here. And I will latch on to what you mentioned about the GDPR and the way it's being adopted haphazardly across Africa. Truth be told was that before GDPR, we had the Malabo Convention, which is actually a really great legislation developed by the African Union, adopted by the heads of states, the African Union, but it hasn't found its way into laws in the different African countries. So we continue to struggle in Africa in terms of data, and there's so much, the data regulations in Africa today work more against African companies than companies in America and China and India who can do whatever they like, but African companies in Nigeria, African companies in South Africa cannot exchange data.
Thank you so much. Lucia?
So quickly, a synopsis I would say is providing government incentives like tax incentives for production and for public connectivity and for educational opportunities through content, but also DFI investments in creative infrastructure on the ground that creates training and jobs, and supplemented by private solutions like ad-supported content and mobile data rewards that incentivize increased online engagement and usage, and interactive content that creates a two-way street of audiences and users coming into the system, but then being rewarded and providing data that they have a power over to opt in or out of, and then using this to drive learning, upliftment of previously unheard voices, and attracting people with content that they love, getting them in the ecosystem so that they can transition into content that they need, and then creatively opening up collaboration between different African countries. Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. It's an honor to be participating in this panel with all of you.
And Eddie, last but certainly not least. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. There we go. First is to say how humbled and thankful I am to have such wonderful panelists and all the chats and the questions. And I think this is the most engaging, this is the most different kind of topic I've ever had to be involved in, where it's not just about fintech or payments. It's really about how do you apply soft power and use these things like technology, art, or commerce, whatever it is, to just drive Africa and explode Africa in the 21st century. I think mine will be 3 key points to summarize. I will lean on payments because that's my patient, but payments is largely a utility. It's an infrastructure, one that I have seen in my career accelerate fantastic and brilliant business models. The possibility of just making money move faster than ever before allows such amazing business models to be built, whether it's education, whether it's commerce, whether it's art, whatever it is. And my passion for Africa is if we can develop the possibility of making money move faster and easier than ever before across Africa, and we take that power and deliver it across the world, and more so in the East than the West, because there's this fundamental opportunity, and we have very significant similarities in manufacturing or creating, and even in culture, in creating the ability to exchange value between one another. One thing has to happen, and I think I love what Wale said. The minute you leave urban areas, outside urban areas, and you go back to your village, connectivity is a problem, and it's a chicken and egg problem. Because how do you convince an investor to deliver connectivity in an area where the need or the utility has not been created? And that's why for investors, mobile operators, they need to take the conviction, make the investment, and purposely move from offline, especially in Africa, to online, because the model that has blown up digital platforms, especially in the East, is because they're operating online. It's because they've moved from offline. If we can get more Africans online than offline, as we have seen, mobile payments, mobile money is largely offline. How do we get to the next level of payments? And that is largely going to have to be us moving online. Finally, one of the most difficult things, even in my experience in trying to get 100 million people to pay each other, one of the most difficult things to do is to create a universal African brand. This has been my biggest career challenge. How do you make one brand and one utility that can be accepted across Africa? Other continents with larger communities or larger populations, India, China, we've heard about how India absorbs its content and they've been trained to absorb its content. How do we create that universal brand and purpose across all the 50 countries and say, can we connect? And that is what will create and grow the digital platforms, and the payment, the need for the payment rails will come in. But other than that, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the audience, whoever was able to plug in. I want to thank Wale and the amazing panelists, and I was glad to meet you, and all the best for Africa.
Thank you so much. I think we've covered a lot of very diverse topics today, from education to entertainment, speaking about the infrastructure as well as building up the value chain, and even the consumption on the other end. And so I hope that we've done justice to this topic, both concisely to some degrees and expansively to other degrees. So it has been my honor to be the moderator on this panel. As I said, I didn't have to do very much. Everyone was so engaged. And I will give it back to Obi to close us off.
Stephany, thank you so much for doing a wonderful job as moderator. And thank you to all our wonderful panelists for a great conversation. I think we need to continue these conversations and to stay collaborating. That seems to me like that's the real message I took out of this. And thanks for your depth. But before we go, I've got to ask my partner and the founder of Africa Soft Power to say a few words. She can't just be here and not say a thing. So please, Nkiru, over to you.
Thanks, Obi, and thank you, everybody. Stephany, you're amazing. Wale, Chinenye, Lucia, Eddie, fantastic. I felt like I was back in school. I was actually making notes and like, oh, I hope we're catching all of these things. This was really phenomenal for us. The whole idea of the soft power thing is just to engage us as Africans, engage the whole continent to rethink itself. And I think this conversation has been really, really, really like engaging for me in particular, but like we've been getting a lot of like chats like, oh my God, this is amazing, this is amazing. So thank you so much for being here and giving it your all. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners also enjoyed it. Thank you so much. It's about Africa, it's about us loving each other, it's about us being, looking out for each other and reimagining who we are as Africans. Thank you so much. And thank you, Stephany, again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you both, and thanks to the audience.
And goodbye to everybody online as well that came on. Thank you so much, and see you tomorrow.
Yeah, people online. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for
guys.
coming. Have a great time.
Bye, Nairobi, America.
Stay safe, everyone. Nairobi, Kenya, Canada, everyone.
Obi, Eddie, Wale, Chinenye, Nkiru, Stephany.
Bye.